Station Nova 9 floated in the darkness between stars, a massive wheel of metal and glass where thousands of alien species lived and worked together. In the Medical Wings observation garden, under artificial sunlight that never quite felt real, a small human boy sat cross-legged on the grass. His name was Tommy Blake, and he was 8 years old. He had never spoken a single word in his entire life. Tommy arranged colored stones in front of him, creating intricate patterns that seemed to follow some logic only he understood. Circles within circles, spirals that connected to geometric shapes, lines that branched like trees or rivers. The doctors who watched him work said the patterns were beautiful, maybe even mathematical, but they couldn't figure out what they meant. Tommy's mind was working, that much was clear. He just wouldn't tell anyone what he was thinking. His mother, Dr. Rachel Blake, stood at the garden's edge with her husband, Greg. They'd been watching their son for 20 minutes now, hoping this time might be different. Rachel was a xenolinguist, someone who studied alien languages for a living. She'd helped establish first contact with 3 different species, cracking communication codes that had stumped other experts. But her own son remained a mystery she couldn't solve. Greg placed a hand on her shoulder. He taught alien literature at the station's university, helping humans and other species understand each other's stories. Together, they knew more about communication than almost anyone in the galaxy. None of it had helped Tommy. The test results came back, Rachel said quietly. Dr. Morrison says there's nothing physically wrong. No damage to his vocal cords, no neurological problems, no hearing issues. Tommy can speak. He just chooses not to. Or he can't, Greg replied. Not in the way we understand it. They tried everything over the years. Speech therapy with the best human doctors. Sessions with Vrelian telepaths who could sense emotions. Even a Calliran harmony specialist who worked with species that communicated through musical tones. Tommy cooperated with all of it, patient and calm, but he never made a sound beyond breathing. The strange thing was, Tommy didn't seem unhappy. He smiled sometimes, laughed without sound when something amused him. He hugged his parents, played with other children in his own quiet way, drew pictures that showed clear feelings and ideas. He was present, aware, engaged with the world. He just existed in total silence. Other parents might have given up, might have accepted their child would never speak. But Rachel and Greg couldn't let it go. They felt like Tommy had something important locked inside him, trying desperately to get out but blocked by some invisible wall. Late at night, Rachel sometimes cried, wondering if her son felt trapped in his own mind, screaming where no one could hear. The garden's main doors opened with a soft hiss. Station personnel were leading a group through, probably tourists or visiting diplomats. Rachel barely glanced at them until Greg suddenly gripped her arm. "Is that a dragon?" he whispered. Rachel's breath caught. Moving through the garden path was a creature from legend, from humanity's oldest stories given impossible life. The dragon stood twice as tall as a human, with scales the color of molten copper that seemed to glow from within. Its wings were folded against its back, each one large enough to cast shadows across the entire garden. The dragon's eyes were the most striking feature, crystalline and ancient, holding depths that suggested intelligence far beyond human understanding. Dragons rarely left their home systems in the Ember Reaches. They were among the galaxy's oldest spacefaring species, existing long before humans discovered fire. They served as diplomats sometimes, mediators in conflicts too complex for younger species to navigate. Seeing one here, on a medical station, was extraordinary. The diplomatic party moved along the path, station officials pointing out various features. But the dragon, whose name tag read Emberwing in both Galactic Standard and Ancient Script, had stopped walking. It stood perfectly still, its massive head turned toward the far corner of the garden. Toward Tommy. Rachel felt her heart hammering. The dragon was staring at her son with an intensity that made her instinctively want to run and grab Tommy, pull him away from those enormous jaws and razor claws. But something kept her frozen in place. The dragon's expression wasn't predatory. It was something else entirely. Something that looked almost like recognition. Tommy had noticed too. For the first time since the group entered, the boy looked up from his stones. His small hands went still. He stared back at the dragon, and the two of them locked eyes across 30 meters of garden space. The moment stretched. The other diplomats continued walking, not noticing their dragon companion had fallen behind. Station officials kept talking, their voices fading as they moved around a corner. And still, Tommy and Emberwing stared at each other, boy and dragon, human and ancient being, connected by something invisible and profound. Then Emberwing did something unexpected. The dragon's head lowered in what looked unmistakably like a bow. A gesture of respect, maybe even reverence, directed at an 8-year-old human child who had never spoken. Tommy didn't look away. For just a moment, Rachel could have sworn she saw her son smile. Not his usual quiet smile, but something deeper, something that suggested he had just recognized someone he'd been waiting his whole life to meet. The next morning, Rachel and Greg received a message that left them speechless. Emberwing, the ancient dragon diplomat, had formally requested a private audience with their son. No cameras, no recording devices, no medical staff taking notes. Just the dragon and Tommy, alone in one of the station's observation domes. Absolutely not, Rachel said immediately. We don't know anything about this creature. What if it's dangerous? Station Administrator Wallace, a tired-looking man in his 50s, rubbed his temples. Dr. Blake, I understand your concerns. But Emberwing is a registered diplomat with the Galactic Council. We can't simply refuse without causing an interstellar incident. Dragons don't make requests lightly. My son doesn't speak, Greg interjected. What could a dragon possibly want with a silent child? Wallace had no answer. But after hours of negotiation, a compromise was reached. Tommy and Emberwing could meet in Observation Dome 3, a transparent bubble that looked out into space. Rachel and Greg would watch from an adjacent room through one-way glass. Security would be on standby, ready to intervene at the first sign of trouble. Tommy seemed unconcerned by all the fuss. When Rachel explained where they were going, he simply nodded and took her hand. He'd always been calm, almost unnaturally so, but today Rachel sensed something different in him. Anticipation, maybe. Or recognition. The observation dome was stunning, a hemisphere of transparent material with nothing between you and the cosmos. Stars glittered in every direction, and the swirling colors of a nearby nebula painted the darkness in shades of purple and gold. In the center of the room sat Tommy, cross-legged on the floor with his colored stones arranged around him. Waiting. From the observation room, Rachel pressed her hands against the glass. Her heart hammered as the dome's opposite door opened, and Emberwing entered. The dragon moved with surprising grace for something so massive, wings folded tight, copper scales catching the starlight. Each step was deliberate, careful, as if afraid of startling the small human waiting. Emberwing settled on the floor across from Tommy, perhaps 5 meters away. The dragon folded its legs beneath its body like a cat, tail curling around its side. For a moment, nothing happened. Tommy continued arranging his stones. The dragon simply watched, breathing slowly. What's it doing? Greg whispered. I don't know, Rachel admitted. Her fingers trembled against the glass. Minutes passed. 10. 20. 30. Neither Tommy nor the dragon moved beyond the necessary. The boy worked on his patterns, creating spirals within spirals. The dragon breathed, its massive chest rising and falling like slow thunder. Rachel was about to suggest they end this pointless exercise when something changed. Emberwing began to hum. It wasn't a melody, exactly. It was deeper than that, stranger. A sound that didn't come from the throat but seemed to resonate from somewhere inside the dragon's entire body. Rachel felt it through the glass, through the walls, through her own bones. It was a frequency that touched something primal in her nervous system, making her hair stand on end and her eyes water for reasons she couldn't explain. The hum had layers. Underneath what she could hear, Rachel sensed there were other sounds, other frequencies, vibrations too low or too high for human ears but somehow still present, still felt. It was like standing next to an enormous instrument that played chords in dimensions she'd never known existed. Tommy's hands went still. The colored stone he'd been holding slipped from his fingers, forgotten. Slowly, the boy's head lifted. He stared at Emberwing with an expression Rachel had never seen on her son's face before. Wonder. Recognition. Understanding. The dragon's hum continued, shifting through frequencies that made the air itself seem to shimmer. And then something impossible happened. Tommy's lips moved. Rachel grabbed Greg's arm so hard she'd later find bruises on his skin. They both leaned forward, pressing against the glass, hardly daring to breathe. Tommy, the boy whispered. His voice was rough, uncertain, like someone using muscles they'd forgotten existed. But it was clear. Real. Actual words forming in actual sound. My name is Tommy. Rachel's vision blurred with tears. Greg made a sound between a laugh and a sob. In the observation dome, their son, their silent son who had never spoken in 8 years of life, had just said his first words. Emberwing's humming ceased. The dragon's ancient eyes gleamed with something that might have been satisfaction, or perhaps sadness. When it spoke, its voice was surprisingly gentle, though it resonated with the same deep harmonics as the humming. Yes, little flameling, the dragon said in perfect galactic standard that somehow felt translated from something much older. I know. Tommy didn't look afraid. He tilted his head, studying the dragon the way he usually studied his stone patterns. Then he spoke again, voice growing slightly stronger. You sound right. 3 words. Just 3 simple words. But they contained a universe of meaning. Rachel understood immediately, even through her tears. Everything else had sounded wrong to Tommy. Every human voice, every alien language, every attempt at communication. It had all been noise, discordant and painful. But the dragon's humming, those impossible harmonics, those frequencies that touched something beneath consciousness itself, those sounded right. Emberwing's expression shifted into something that might have been a smile on a creature with such different features. And you hear right, young one. The first of your kind in many generations who can perceive the old ways. What does that mean? Tommy asked. He was speaking more easily now, though his voice remained quiet. Why can I hear you when I can't hear them? He gestured vaguely toward the one-way glass, toward his parents he somehow knew were watching. Because you hear what words truly are, Emberwing replied. Not the sounds they make in air, but the shapes they create in the spaces between thoughts. Most beings have forgotten this language. Even my own people rarely speak it anymore. But you, little flameling, you were born hearing only this. Everything else is static to you. Painful noise without meaning. Tommy nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he'd always suspected but couldn't articulate. Can you teach me to hear the other way too? So I can talk to my mom and dad? The dragon's eyes softened. I can try, young one. If you're willing to learn, I will teach you to filter the noise, to find the harmonics hidden in their voices. It will not be easy. I want to try, Tommy said. Then, quieter, almost to himself, I want to tell them I love them. In the observation room, Rachel collapsed against Greg, sobbing openly now. Her son could speak. Her son wanted to speak to them. After 8 years of silence, of wondering if Tommy even understood love, she finally knew. He'd been there all along, trapped behind a wall of sound that hurt too much to cross. But now, maybe, there was hope. Over the next 3 weeks, Station Nova 9 became the center of the most unusual education the galaxy had ever witnessed. Every morning, Tommy met with Emberwing in the observation dome. And every morning, Rachel and Greg watched through the glass as their son learned to speak. But it wasn't speech therapy the way humans understood it. Emberwing didn't teach Tommy to make sounds or practice pronunciation. Instead, the dragon taught him to hear differently, to find meaning in the chaos that had overwhelmed him since birth. Imagine, Emberwing explained during one session, that you're standing in a room with 1,000 beings, all shouting different words in different languages at the same time. That's what normal speech sounds like to you. Pure noise. But underneath all that noise, there's a pattern. A rhythm. Like a heartbeat beneath the shouting. Tommy nodded, listening intently. He spoke more each day now, though still only to the dragon. His voice was getting stronger, more confident. The old speech, Emberwing continued, is that heartbeat. It's the language that exists before words, the way consciousness itself communicates. When I hum, I'm speaking directly to that part of you, bypassing all the noise. But your parents can't speak this way. They only know the surface language, the words and sounds. So you must learn to hear both layers at once. How? Tommy asked. The dragon's eyes gleamed. By understanding that every voice carries both. The words are noise, yes. But buried in that noise, in the tone and rhythm and feeling behind the words, is the old speech. You must learn to focus on that deeper layer while ignoring the surface chaos. It was painfully slow work. Emberwing would hum a phrase in the old speech, then speak the same concept in Galactic Standard, helping Tommy connect the two languages. The boy would close his eyes, concentrating, trying to find the harmonic patterns in normal speech. Sometimes he succeeded. Other times he'd wince and cover his ears, the sounds too jarring, too discordant. On those days, Rachel wanted to burst through the doors and hold her son, protect him from the pain. But Greg always stopped her. This was Tommy's choice. He was fighting to reach them, and they had to let him fight. News of the dragon teaching a human child spread through the station. At first, people were simply curious. But then something strange started happening. Station personnel who worked near the observation dome began reporting unusual experiences. A security officer named Derek spoke about it first. I was doing my rounds outside the dome, he told his supervisor, and I could hear this humming sound coming through the walls. Barely noticeable, you know? But after a few minutes, I felt different. Karma. I'd been stressed about my daughter's school troubles, fighting with my ex-wife about custody arrangements. But while I stood there listening, all that anger just faded away. Not gone, exactly, but less important. Like I could suddenly see what really mattered. Others reported similar experiences. A maintenance worker named Claire said her chronic anxiety disappeared for hours after walking past the dome. Two diplomats from different species who'd been locked in bitter trade negotiations for weeks suddenly found common ground after their meeting was moved to a room adjacent to where Tommy practiced. Even people who just walked by felt lighter somehow, more connected to those around them. Rachel interviewed some of them for her research. As a linguist, she was fascinated by what was happening. Tommy wasn't just learning to speak. He was learning the old speech itself, the harmonic language Emberwing spoke of. And when he practiced, those harmonics bled through the walls, affecting everyone nearby. It's like he's singing at a frequency we can't consciously hear, Rachel explained to Greg one night. But our bodies hear it. Our nervous systems respond to it. The old speech doesn't just communicate information. It communicates feeling, truth, connection itself. Is it safe? Greg asked. All these people being affected without their knowledge or consent. Rachel had wondered the same thing. But every person who experienced it reported only positive effects. Reduced stress, better sleep, improved relationships, clearer thinking. Whatever Tommy was learning, it seemed to heal rather than harm. By the third week, Tommy achieved his first breakthrough. Emberwing asked Rachel to join them in the dome. Her hands shook as she entered, seeing her son clearly for the first time in weeks rather than through glass. Sit, the dragon instructed gently. And speak to your child. Say anything. Rachel sat cross-legged in front of Tommy. He looked at her with those familiar brown eyes, and she saw tears forming there. He wanted this so badly. So did she. Hey, sweetheart, she said, voice cracking. I've missed hearing your voice. Tommy closed his eyes, concentrating. His small hands clenched into fists with the effort. Rachel could see him trying, really trying, to find the harmonic layer beneath her words. To hear past the noise to the meaning underneath. Mom, he whispered finally. His eyes opened, bright with tears and triumph. I hear you. You sound like sunshine feels. Rachel broke down completely. She pulled Tommy into her arms, sobbing against his hair while he held her tight. Her son had spoken to her. After 8 years, her son had called her mom. Over the following days, Tommy's ability grew stronger. He learned to speak to his father, then to Dr. Morrison, then to other station personnel. Each conversation was short and exhausting for him, requiring immense concentration. But he was doing it. The wall was coming down. And everywhere Tommy went, that strange effect followed. People in his presence felt different. Better. More honest with themselves and others. Arguments seemed petty when he was nearby. Prejudices felt hollow. In the cafeteria where Tommy ate lunch, humans and aliens who normally kept to their own groups started sitting together, finding common ground they'd never noticed before. Some called it miracle. Others called it evolution. But everyone agreed on one thing: the silent human boy was learning to speak in a language older than words. And when he spoke, something fundamental changed in the people around him. Something that suggested humanity might be capable of communication in ways the galaxy had long forgotten. Emberwing watched it all with ancient satisfaction. He learns quickly, the dragon told Rachel during one observation. In time, he may speak the old speech better than my own people. Humanity has always been full of surprises. What happens when he masters it? Rachel asked. The dragon's expression grew serious. Then, Dr. Blake, your son becomes very valuable. And very dangerous to those who profit from misunderstanding. The warning came too late. At 0300 hour station time, the habitat section's environmental systems went haywire. Alarm klaxons wailed through the corridors as toxic sonic frequencies flooded the ventilation system. It wasn't loud enough to damage eardrums, but the frequencies were specifically calibrated to cause intense pain to anyone perceiving harmonic layers beneath normal sound. Tommy woke up screaming. It was the first time Rachel had heard her son scream, and the sound tore through her heart like broken glass. She found him curled on his bed, hands pressed over his ears, his whole body shaking with agony. Make it stop, he sobbed. Mom, please, make it stop. Greg was already on the comm system, demanding answers from station control. Rachel held Tommy tight, feeling helpless as her son writhed in pain from sounds she couldn't even hear. Whatever was flooding through the vents, it was torture for him. Across the station, Emberwing collapsed in the diplomatic quarters. The dragon's ancient body seized as the frequencies attacked its nervous system. Dragons heard the old speech naturally, constantly. This sonic assault was like having knives driven into their consciousness. Within minutes, Emberwing was unconscious, barely breathing. Station security scrambled to find the source of the malfunction. Chief Reynolds, a veteran officer who'd served on Nova 9 for 15 years, coordinated the response from Central Command. But the system failures were cascading faster than his team could trace them. Every time they isolated one problem, 2 more popped up elsewhere. "This isn't random," Reynolds muttered, studying the pattern. "Someone engineered this." He was right. While security focused on the environmental crisis, a team of operatives moved through the chaos toward the Blake family's quarters. They wore the uniforms of medical response personnel, carried legitimate authorization codes, and knew exactly where they were going. The leader was a woman named Carla Voss, though that wasn't her real name. She worked for the Unity Collective, a political organization that had been watching Tommy's progress with growing alarm. The collective believed in controlled information, managed communication, keeping the galaxy's countless species organized through carefully structured diplomatic channels. They were the ones who decided what got translated and how, who spoke to whom, what information crossed between cultures. The old speech threatened all of that. A language that bypassed translation, that spoke directly to consciousness, that couldn't be controlled or censored or managed. That made people feel each other's truth regardless of species or culture. It was everything the Unity Collective feared. They couldn't kill a child on a diplomatic station. Too obvious, too messy. But they could take him, claim medical emergency protocols, transport him to a secure facility where he'd disappear into their research programs. Maybe they'd study him. Maybe they'd try to suppress his ability. Maybe they'd just keep him locked away where he couldn't teach others. The operatives reached the Blake quarters just as Rachel was trying to calm Tommy through another wave of sonic pain. The door chimed. Greg, distracted and desperate, opened it without checking the security screen. "Medical response," Voss said, holding up her authorization badge. "We're evacuating all sensitive individuals to shielded areas. Your son needs to come with us immediately." Something in her tone made Rachel's instincts flare. She pulled Tommy closer. "Show me the evacuation order." There's no time. The sonic frequencies are intensifying. Children are particularly vulnerable." "Then you can shield this room," Rachel said firmly. "My son isn't going anywhere with strangers." Voss's expression hardened. She made a subtle gesture, and the 2 men behind her moved forward. One was carrying what looked like medical equipment but moved like security personnel. The other had his hand near something on his belt that definitely wasn't medical supplies. Greg stepped between them and his family. "I think you need to leave. Now." "Sir, we have authorization under emergency protocols." "Stand aside." That's when Derek appeared in the corridor. The security officer who'd felt different after hearing Tommy practice. He'd been doing rounds when he noticed the medical team moving with suspicious purpose. Something felt wrong about them. Not anything obvious, nothing he could articulate in a report. Just a feeling that their intentions didn't match their words. "Hey Voss," Derek called out. "Funny seeing you here. Last I checked, you were assigned to the diplomatic wing." Voss's jaw tightened. "Emergency reassignment." "Right. Let me just verify that with Chief Reynolds." Derek reached for his comm device. In that moment of distraction, Claire the maintenance worker rounded the corner carrying a toolbox. She was there to fix the environmental systems, but she recognized the tension immediately. She'd also been affected by Tommy's practice sessions, felt that strange clarity they brought. And looking at these supposed medical responders, she felt nothing but wrongness. "Need some help, Derek?" she asked casually, but her grip on the heavy toolbox shifted into something that could be used as a weapon if needed. More people arrived. Station personnel who happened to be nearby, drawn by the commotion or just doing their jobs. A Vrelian engineer named Korsh. A human janitor named Bill who'd been cleaning the corridor. A young doctor named Amy checking on families in the habitat section. None of them were security. None of them were fighters. But they'd all been touched by Tommy's presence over the past weeks, all felt something shift inside them when the boy practiced nearby. And now, looking at these operatives trying to take the child, every one of them felt the same thing. This was wrong. They couldn't articulate why or how they knew, couldn't point to specific evidence. But they knew it in their bones, in that place where the old speech touched them without words. They moved to block the corridor. Not threatening, not violent. Just standing firm, bodies between the operatives and the Blake family. "You need to leave," Derek said quietly. Medical response teams don't travel in groups of 3. They don't carry concealed weapons. And they sure as hell don't try to evacuate one specific child while ignoring everyone else in the section. Voss calculated her options. She had 3 operatives against 15 ordinary station personnel. She had authorization codes that would hold up under basic scrutiny but not intensive investigation. And she had about 3 minutes before Chief Reynolds traced the security anomaly back to this corridor. "This isn't over," she said flatly. Then she turned and walked away, her team following. The sonic frequencies shut off 10 minutes later. Tommy's pain faded to a dull ache. Emberwing regained consciousness in the medical bay, weak but alive. And Chief Reynolds discovered evidence of external system infiltration that pointed directly to Unity Collective operatives on the station. But the message was clear. Tommy had enemies now. Powerful enemies who wouldn't stop just because one attempt failed. The boy who'd learned to speak in the language between stars had become too dangerous to ignore. That night, Rachel held her son while he slept fitfully. Greg sat by the window, staring out at the stars, both of them knowing their lives had just changed forever. Tommy wasn't just their son anymore. He was something the galaxy feared and needed in equal measure. And somewhere in the diplomatic wing, Emberwing lay recovering, Ancient Mind already planning their next move. Because the dragon knew something the humans were only beginning to understand. Once you learned to speak truth that couldn't be hidden, there was no going back to comfortable lies. The question was whether Tommy would survive long enough to teach others. Or whether those who profited from misunderstanding would silence him first. The morning after the attack, Emberwing called an emergency meeting. Despite still recovering, the dragon insisted on gathering Rachel, Greg, and station leadership in a secured conference room. Chief Reynolds had swept it 3 times for listening devices. "Tommy cannot stay here," Emberwing said without preamble. The dragon's voice was weaker than usual, but the authority behind it remained absolute. "The Unity Collective will try again. Next time they'll be more careful, more thorough. They have resources we cannot match on this station." Rachel felt her stomach drop. "You want us to leave? Go into hiding?" "No," the dragon replied. "I want Tommy to come with me. To the Ember Reaches. To train properly among my people, where he can learn the full depth of the old speech without fear." The silence in the room was deafening. Greg found his voice first. "You're asking us to give you our son." "I'm asking you to save his life," Emberwing said gently. "And perhaps save much more than that. Tommy has a gift the galaxy hasn't seen in millennia. But gifts without training are dangerous, both to the bearer and to everyone around them. He needs to learn control, understanding, wisdom. Things I cannot teach him in stolen hours on a station where enemies plot his capture." "He's 8 years old," Rachel said, tears already forming. "He just learned to talk to us. You want us to send him away to an alien world we've never seen?" "I want him to survive," the dragon answered. "And I want him to reach his potential. In 10 years, perhaps 20, he could return to you. Fully trained. Capable of teaching others. Ready to change how the galaxy communicates." The discussion went on for hours. Station Administrator Wallace talked about increased security measures. Chief Reynolds proposed witness protection protocols. But everyone knew the truth. The Unity Collective had reach across dozens of systems. If they wanted Tommy, eventually they'd find a way to take him. That evening, Rachel and Greg sat with their son in their quarters. Tommy was arranging his colored stones again, creating patterns that now Rachel could almost understand. After weeks of watching him practice, of being touched by those harmonic frequencies, she was starting to perceive the deeper meaning in his designs. "Tommy," she said softly. "We need to talk about something important." The boy looked up, and Rachel was struck by how much older he seemed than 8. The old speech had awakened something in him, a depth of understanding that went beyond years. She explained Emberwing's proposal as simply as she could. Leaving Earth, leaving his parents, going to live with dragons on a distant world. Learning to use his gift fully. Being safe from people who wanted to hurt him. Tommy listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time, still holding one of his colored stones. Then he spoke, and his voice carried undertones that made both parents feel his words in their hearts rather than just their ears. "I was never gone," he said. "All those years I didn't talk, I was still here. I heard everything you said to me. I felt every hug, every time you read me stories even though I couldn't tell you I loved them. I learned you in ways you didn't know someone could learn another person." Rachel reached for his hand. "We know that now, sweetheart." "I have to go," Tommy continued. "Not because I want to leave you, but because I can feel it. There's something I'm supposed to do with this gift. Something important. And if I stay here, if I'm always hiding and scared, I'll never become strong enough to do it. You're so young, Greg said, voice breaking. Too young to carry this kind of burden. Tommy smiled then, and it was his mother's smile, warm and genuine. Maybe. But I'm not carrying it alone. I'll have Emberwing. I'll have the other dragons. And I'll have you, even across the stars. Because now I can talk to you. Now you know I love you. The tears came then for all three of them. They held each other while stars wheeled past the window, while the station hummed with life around them, while the galaxy spun on, unaware that a human child was about to change everything. 2 days later, preparations were complete. The Ember Reaches had sent a diplomatic vessel to collect Emberwing and Tommy. Security was tighter than it had been for visiting heads of state. Chief Reynolds wasn't taking any chances. But before leaving, Tommy asked for one thing. He wanted to say goodbye to the station properly. Not with words, but with the old speech. A gift for the people who'd protected him, who'd stood between him and danger without even understanding why. Station Administrator Wallace was hesitant. We don't know what effect it might have on such a large population. What if something goes wrong? Nothing will go wrong, Emberwing assured him. The boy wishes to share understanding. That's all. One moment of true connection before he departs. They arranged it in the central plaza, the massive open space at the station's heart where thousands of beings gathered for festivals and announcements. Word spread quickly. The human boy who could speak without words was going to sing. Over 5,000 beings packed the plaza that morning. Humans, Vrelians, Caloran, species from dozens of worlds, all curious or skeptical or hopeful. Tommy stood on a small stage, looking impossibly small next to Emberwing's massive form. Rachel and Greg stood in the front row, holding each other tight. Tommy closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. And then he sang. It wasn't words. It wasn't even a melody in any traditional sense. It was the old speech in its purest form, harmonic frequencies that bypassed ears and spoke directly to consciousness. Tommy sang of connection, of the threads that linked all thinking beings regardless of species or culture. He sang of the loneliness of separation and the joy of true understanding. He sang of hope for a future where differences enhanced rather than divided. For 3 minutes, every being in that plaza experienced something impossible. They felt each other. Not telepathy exactly, not reading thoughts or invading privacy. But a deep, profound awareness of the shared experience of consciousness. The Vrelian merchant felt what it was like to be the human janitor struggling with debt. The station administrator felt the homesickness of the young Caloran student far from family. The security officer felt the fear of the refugee family seeking asylum. And in feeling each other, they understood. Prejudices that had seemed reasonable suddenly felt hollow. Arguments that had felt important revealed themselves as petty. The artificial divisions of species and culture and politics faded, leaving only the fundamental truth. They were all conscious beings, all trying to find meaning and connection in a vast and often confusing universe. When Tommy's song ended, the plaza was silent. 5,000 beings stood in stunned stillness, tears streaming down faces and equivalent structures, trying to process what they just experienced. Then, like a wave, they began to move. Strangers embraced. Enemies shook hands. Species that had never spoken except through formal diplomatic channels began actually talking, really communicating for the first time. Rachel watched it happen through her own tears. Her son had done this. Her silent boy had given voice to something everyone felt but couldn't express. Connection itself, made manifest through sound. The effect lasted only minutes before fading back to normal awareness. But the memory remained. And everyone who'd been there knew they'd been touched by something profound, something that suggested what the galaxy could become if beings truly understood each other. Tommy opened his eyes and smiled. He looked tired but happy. This was his goodbye gift. His way of saying thank you and I'll miss you and remember this feeling. All in a song that needed no translation. An hour later, he boarded the diplomatic vessel with Emberwing. Rachel and Greg stood at the departure gate, waving until the ship disappeared from view. Their son was gone, off to learn mysteries on a world of dragons, and they wouldn't see him for years. But they weren't sad. Not entirely. Because they knew Tommy was exactly where he needed to be, becoming exactly who he was meant to become. And across the galaxy, recordings of the human boy's song were already spreading. Some governments tried to ban it, sensing the threat to their control. Others studied it desperately, trying to understand how a child achieved what their best scientists couldn't. But in quiet corners of 1,000 worlds, beings who heard it began to change. To listen deeper. To speak true. To reach across the artificial divisions that separated them. The Unity Collective had been right to fear. Tommy Blake, the human boy who never spoke, had learned a language that could remake the galaxy. One whispered word, one harmonic frequency, one moment of true understanding at a time. And somewhere in the Ember Reaches, on a world of ancient dragons and deeper mysteries, that boy was just beginning to learn what he was truly capable of. The story wasn't ending. It was only just beginning.